Welcome back to Roompact's ResEdChat podcast. I'm your host, Dustin Ramsdell, and this bi-weekly show is, featuring a variety of topics that are relevant to the residence life and hired professionals who work with college and university housing. So our kind of variety show is having what I feel like are sort of concurrent content series going on right now around things like career transitions, how you make those kind of choices about where and what you want to do next in your career, as well as sort of supporting the variety of populations that are showing up in residence life today. So the conversation today, I think, will have kind of a general applicability in that sort of accessibility topic, is sort of hitting on a couple of different areas, how it shows up in the residence halls. So we will have our guests introduce themselves quickly and then get into their professional background, and then we'll get into our conversation on accessibility in the residence hall. So Susan, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, hello. My name is Susan Robison. I use she, her pronouns. Currently, I am a resident director at Northern Michigan University. I don't have a long list of professional experience. I'm still a new professional. Most recently, I was a resident director at Fort Lewis College in Durango, Colorado. It is one of two Indigenous serving institutions in the nation, which is the biggest draw of why I decided to work there. And then before that, I was a graduate assistant at Missouri State University, where I got my master's degree in student affairs and higher education.
Awesome. Well, we're happy to have you and your perspective as a new professional. I think that's also just a, helpful sort of way that we can kind of bring in, a lot of different perspectives as, people who are at a variety of points in their career, also working in a bunch of different institutions and how the, public, private, or the populations that those institutions serve. But, again, our conversation today is focusing on accessibility. So it certainly can be a big topic on its own. So I think we'll start with, I guess, for you to kind of help us kind of get our arms around this a little bit. What are the different ways that accessibility can be defined in this context of sort of college housing, residence life and everything? How do you sort of define accessibility in this context?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, in grad school, we have courses relating to diversity and accessibility and, just inclusivity for our students. And you have the textbook answer. But to me, accessibility, I think of it as a way for students to live their best lives without having to ask for anything. And I really do try to be on the forefront of advocating for my students so they don't have to advocate for themselves, because a lot of them had spent their entire lives advocating and they just need a break from that.
Yeah, I think that is an interesting point because that is sort of, I think, like kind of the peak level of being accessible, is designing with that in mind, where it's like everything from like you're putting images on a website, alt image, alt text for that image. It's how you design sort of text and presentation slides, and just the design and color choice of things, and the way that you just sort of try to incorporate that and anticipate, like you said, versus you know the level down, I think, is being very empathetic and responsive and uh, sort of accessible in the way of like, I think most institutions are at the very least, is like a student asks for something and they're like, you got it. Yeah, we're more than happy to do that. Give you whatever you need. If it's more test time or, taking the test in a distraction free environment or something, those sort of things. But I like that idea of like, you know, they shouldn't have to be kind of burdened with constantly sort of, kind of divulging the sort of accommodations that they need and everything. So, um, I guess like, are there other things that you can think of? Because I know, like, I think uh, in the residence life context, I think there's some unique ways that sort of shows up. Um, how do you sort of define, like, specifically in like the residence hall context, like how does sort of designing with accessibility in mind kind of pop up?
Yeah. So something that we all have to realize is some of our buildings are not new. In fact, most of them aren't. So they aren't designed with the kind of universal accessibility in mind. I've worked at schools where every single building is different. And, like, for example, school, the community building across the street from us had one elevator, and you had to have special permission to use it because it was one of the largest buildings, so they can't just have the one elevator running all the time because it would break down. And then my building, which was across the street, had four elevators that were consistently running because we were a little bit taller of a building. We had 8 floors and 9 floors on one on each side. Um, but like considering the more obvious disabilities that people think of when they think of disability and accessibility, so more of physical disabilities, but also keeping in mind that we have invisible disabilities that students may have, be it back issues where they need handicap accessible parking closer to the residence halls, or even the neurodivergencies, and thinking about depression and anxiety as uh, for like legal reasons they are disabilities that you have to divulge if you have them, thinking about job applications and stuff like that, and really, trying to promote that accessibility within residence halls isn't just having an elevator that people can use. It's putting on closed captions when you have movie nights, outlining your bulletin boards and making sure that there's high color contrast, having options to do outdoor events and indoor events. For example, up here at Northern, our students love the outdoors, and hiking events are really common, but a lot of students can't just go on a hike. So making sure that we offer just as many opportunities that are accessible, that, even if it's just a student doesn't have a car, that's still accessibility. And making sure that we think about that in the forefront so that our students feel like they have just as many opportunities as their able-bodied peers.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's so many different sort of aspects to this, like you said, sort of the physical accessibility, which, like, to me, like anticipating that is, something like you said, like the space is what it is, and just like letting people know ahead of time versus like putting it on them to figure out like, well, what entrance should I use that is accessible or is near the, like, you can be like, hey, and if you need accessible entrance, like it's right over here, like there's clear signage and we're letting folks know, and not either making you have to ask or making you have to figure it out on your own. Like I think that sort of like wayfinding is like an interesting thing to kind of anticipate and kind of design towards. But yeah, I think it's as simple as like you said, for any event or things that you're doing, just kind of taking that moment to pause and think about, oh, like, oh, well, what if somebody like doesn't have like a computer or a printer or a car, or like there's somebody that kind of like the bits and pieces that you can make a lot of assumptions that people just have ready access to, or all of that. And just I think you don't have to go all the way with every single thing, but you know there's sometimes, especially just leveraging technology, ways that you can kind of you know try to set up structures to uh, again not have to make people kind of feel like, oh, okay, well, they didn't offer, I guess I have to figure it out on your own. Like you can kind of be like, hey, and if you need transportation, if you need this to be printed, if you need like just click here and do it, like you can kind of try to open yourselves up to it at the very least, because I think even that, just my inclination is not as many people do that as they could and should, as many times as they could or should. um so I think just to kind of drive this home a little bit too, like what do you feel like are the impacts of not designing residence halls for accessibility? Because I think we're kind of giving a lot of the sort of things to consider and options and ways to sort of consider this. So, you know, it's almost the idea of like, why should someone be doing all this work? Like, what are sort of the outcomes, or sort of even like the negative impacts that it has when you don't do this?
Our students want the college experience, especially after the last, gosh, 3 years now. With the isolation, the college experience has changed, but more than ever, students are looking to build a community and feel a home. And if we don't have that sort of mindset of inclusivity and accessibility, they miss out on that. And, I think about my college experience to this day and how I was able to build connections and relationships. Like, I met my husband through my college roommate who stood at our wedding, and if you're not able to build those bridges off the bat and it's all in retrospect and more reactive, like those students don't feel included. And even just, for example, the buttons that you press for a door to automatically open, those were created for people with disabilities who needed easier access to the doors. But when you're carrying 3 boxes worth of bingo supplies for a program, you can't just open the door yourself. So more people use it and more people benefit from it than maybe just the people that it was intended for.
Yeah, and I love that detail of when you sort of are building things, and there's sort of a like a reticence or a skepticism or something, where it's just like, oh, we're just going to do that for like that small population of students, and it's like, no, that's going to help a lot more people. It was the same idea of like making just, support resources more uh accessible digitally, or more, kind of just dynamic instead of the office hours that like different, uh offices are open. Like, that helps your fully online students, it helps your commuter students, it helps your adult learners, it helps, like all these people. So like when you can kind of capture it that way, like, I think that is like a really powerful thing. And even just the idea of like inclusivity in its most like basic, like, I feel like premise is like showing a level of care, showing a level of consideration, and showing sort of like you're welcome here. We know you're here. We want you here. We want you to be included in this event, in this, utilizing this resource, whatever it is. So I feel like that'll be kind of the call to action. I feel like I'm gonna kind of take away from this for sure is like, anticipation. Like having that sort of perspective is gonna be so valuable where, you know, without that, I think students who are needing accommodations of any sort, again, physical, emotional, mental, whatever it is, they're just like always kind of going against the grain and like with a friction. And it would just be understandable at a certain point where like, I don't want to have to like be going, it doesn't have to be this hard. Like, I'm going to go somewhere else, another institution or something that feels more inclusive, or certainly even like in the residence life context, they may feel as though it'd be better for them to live at home, live off campus, and those sort of things. And that's just kind of a loss for obviously the entire campus community, that they're not able to kind of be there at the heart of it, and just have the benefits that that offers. So uh, I think, yeah, there's sort of a clear sort of kind of urgency and sort of relevancy for doing this work. And a lot of times it is sort of the granular smaller things where like, similar to like microaggressions or something, it's death by a thousand cuts. Like, it's not this sort of huge kind of thing that is like a severe turnoff. It can just be where like every day you're kind of having to constantly, you know navigate spaces in a way that just has too much friction than what you should have to endure.
Yeah, it's like professors who have really large lecture halls, or just maybe the air conditioning unit in the back of the classroom is really loud one day, and rather than use the microphone that's there, they say, oh, I'll just speak louder, and that defeats the purpose of the microphone, which is there for accessibility and making sure that students who are hard of hearing, or if English isn't their first language, or the air conditioner in the back is really loud, like, not blowing over the needs of others because you don't want to use a microphone, Like, that's something I've seen a lot as a student and as a professional, is people are like, well, I'll just be louder. And that's defeating the purpose of the supplies given to you and the resources given to you to make others' lives easier, because you're uncomfortable with the microphone.
Yeah. That's a good one. A lot of people are just like, yeah, whatever, like why they're so uncomfortable with a microphone. It's like, well, you know how you're going to get more comfortable with it is by using it. And then like you said, it is there for a reason. And I've even thinking of like in that similar mindset of just like, if we do this, it benefits more people. Like, obviously all the things that you mentioned in that sort of situation of somebody, giving a lecture and just being heard clearly, and everything, is that like, I'm sure in some setups it would like, and this is sort of going off on a tangent, but like if you have like a room that is enabled to sort of do some content capture, like to record that lecture, whatever, it's like you probably need to use the microphone to do that. And it's just like trying to like get people more towards that, where they might even just be like, ah, well, I'm not going to use it. It's like, well, it's going to capture a video with really awful sound, and like the closed captioning is not going to be like, it just sort of like, snowballs from there. So it's like creating kind of a culture for so many different reasons. Like, you can kind of just list off this laundry list of reasons of why like you'd want to have people, leveraging those tools and things that are provided for them, so that they can, you know make sure that everyone is included and understanding, the content, comprehending it. So, and that kind of segues to the next point that I wanted to spend some time on, is like how you see technology playing a role here, because I think sometimes it is just sort of, you know just the physical space, how you design it, wayfinding, signage, and different things like that. But technology anymore, I think, just is getting better at better, and sort of being designed for accessibility. So I'm just curious, and I guess as much as you've kind of seen in maybe the residence life context, like how technology is playing a role here.
working in residence life, a lot of people don't really understand what a resident director is or what they do. And there have been times where the door to get into my building, the card reader doesn't work. And I have my brand new staff ID. I have first year students. I have fourth year students living in my building. And it doesn't matter how new the ID is, the card reader is the issue. So I put up a sign that said, please be patient with the door. Um, and by the time the locksmith rolls around, of course, it's like when you take your car to the mechanic, it works the first time he tries, so he's not seeing an issue, but he doesn't believe me, who's sitting here in my office looking at the door, how many times students are swiping in and that there is an issue. And I think um, that's something that we struggle with in residence life is people don't get that we see it, that we live with it. And so going off of that is just having maybe more people take us a little bit seriously. Like with the technology, our card readers, like their location, how is that for somebody who has mobility disabilities? How can they easily get their card out so that they can swipe it or tap it or whatever it is so that they can still get to the door before it locks again automatically? And really using the technology, like technology is only going to improve lives, like guess depending on who you talk to, but it's helping students with disabilities have a normal quotes life compared to what our society deems. So making sure that maybe if a student, even if it's a student athlete who broke their ankle and is now on crutches, when they swipe or tap to get into the building, the door recognizes that it needs to open for them rather than them have to get around to the door. Having computers, if your school has computer labs in their residence hall with text to speech, with like special braille esque keyboards, having closed caption settings already turned on televisions in the common spaces. And even thinking like in my current building, we have a very like big rec room in the basement, but it's a cinder block and tile basement. So for our neurodivergent students, it's really overstimulating. And something that I'm working with my supervisor and our facilities department is bringing in carpets and sound dampening tiles to make it a space that our students can still use where it's not going to overstimulate them. Um, thinking like I know a lot of institutions already have it, but our fire safety initiatives, like having both the sound and the light for our students who are deaf or hard of hearing, but also our students who are low vision and blind. And just really not having to backtrack on stuff like that. And well, if it's already available, it might cost a little bit more money. But if we do it now, it'll benefit all of these students.
Yeah, I think that the big part for me there is, and that sort of anticipation piece is like coding into people's information, you know, like for the access to the building, like that, like that makes so much sense. I hope a lot of institutions do that or hear this and look into it. Because yeah, it's stuff like that, or like I know there's just more and more, I think, growth in sort of like digital IDs in terms of like having it on your phone with like for your iPhone users like Apple Wallet or whatever, where you can try to sort of or I'm even just like hotels, like you can use your phone to get into your rooms and like those sort of things where it's like, how can we strive more towards that? Where it's like, yeah, you don't have to like sort of, with like the kind of dexterity or whatever, like hold your car up to a thing and, pull it out or wherever it is. It's just like, if you have your phone, you just like tap a button and it sort of, enables and yeah, knows who you are, knows if the door needs to open for you and those sort of things. So I think that's really great. And I think all those other little details are all those things again that show a level of care, and you don't have to sort of ask about the things that create sort of a world and experience that uh, allows for you to enjoy every part of that residence hall. So I think that those are all yeah, really really helpful things to be considerate of, and it's sort of just like, I think as you sort of build the habit of looking out for them and like making those adjustments is really really helpful for folks. um, and I think if folks are thinking about looking into this and doing their research, kind of doing their homework and everything, are there other resources and things that you'd want to just give a shout out to that folks can look into that we can put in the show notes?
Yeah, I think, it's important to think about partnerships on campus, really utilizing whatever your campus calls it, Disability Resource Center, Accessibility Center, and building those partnerships because our students are going to these offices anyways, or may have the need to go to that office, but they don't know where it is. They don't know how to contact those individuals. And if you have that partnership, you can talk about, like, oh, yeah, like, Jim Bob over there, he's really great. He can work with you. I've worked with him in the past. And building up those relationships because it's only going to make the campus stronger. And also, like, knowing what your students need without tokenizing them. In my building, I have a student who utilizes a walker, and we have two doors that face the parking lot. On the left is where the handicap parking is, and on the right is where the handicap accessible door is. And then that doesn't even factor in like laundry room, lobby access. And, I talked to facilities. I was like, hey, what can we do? How can we make it easier? But also, trying not to overstep those boundaries with your students. It's a fine line to walk, and sometimes you might have a hiccup, but really just like observing and being cognizant of what people are going through in their day to day. And then, I mean, honestly, I just read books. I take courses. Coursera is a really good resource. A bunch of universities put free or less than $100 courses that you can take to build up your professional development. Oklahoma School for the Deaf even has free sign language courses, which isn't something people think about. And it's like 2 different sessions for 5 weeks. I'm going to do that this summer, um, because American Sign Language is just another version of English that not a lot of people know how to talk about, and it could make the biggest difference in somebody's life. And really just doing research on what's available. Library cards are free. Every university has a library, and most communities outside of the university have a library as well. So,
Yeah, I think all good call outs of like almost just like where to start looking, and encouraging folks to do that. And I know, yeah, I mean, I'm just very pleased to see that platforms like Coursera and all that are making kind of free or low cost, like, diversity courses and things available, just so that, like, hopefully, everybody can kind of get to the same baseline. If you like working in residence life and student affairs broadly, I'm very grateful for, just that like kind of uh training of like certain concepts that have been just like hammered in like every year during like training and everything. So it's just like, oh, now I'm realizing like not everybody got that just in sort of the wider world. So if we can, make certain courses and things more widely available, um, we can all hopefully get to kind of a similar place and kind of, have that understanding. And it's like, I don't have to like convince you, like I'm hoping that like this episode is not like, pushing against the grain with somebody in terms of just like, oh, I don't think that's important. I don't think that, it's like, no, this is just like talking through the strategies and contextualizing it in the residence life context. And, um, because I think that's kind of like a, not expecting like perfection, immediately. It's kind of a continuous improvement. Like you said, that can be kind of a long-term thing where you're working with campus partners to sort of, kind of iterate and develop more and more, uh, inclusive and accessible processes and procedures and resources and those sort of things. And I think, like you were saying too, like you don't want to like overstep your bounds and anticipating the needs. I think you can probably reflect on like, wow, somebody's asked, every year or every semester, about like they need this way or something. And it's like, well, how could we just like make that more available and point people towards it versus like forcing people to either go without or asking about it. And I think that just the sort of punchline to kind of just drive the point home of like, there is sort of a like overly anticipatory kind of like version of just like assuming like, oh, well, I know like you have a, yeah, you have to use a walker. So like, I'm sure you probably just need to be like in a protective bubble at all time and all that. It's like, there's still just a human being who wants autonomy and respect and dignity and all those sort of things. It's like, you're kind of going a little too far of just being like, kind of thinking that they're like, I don't know, any which way. It's like they are however they are, and they will, certainly let you know if they need something beyond kind of, I think what's sort of just like kind of common sense, or seeing where it's like, oh, you have to park over here and the entrance is all like, that's a pretty common sense thing. Like that's pretty inconvenient. Like let's try to make that a little bit more convenient. And I think one of my kind of final thoughts, and I'll let you sort of, if you have any sort of concluding thoughts as well, but like you could also just, if you're unsure, like one, again, like I think you can get some cues from sort of history, what you've sort of experienced, or any colleagues have experienced, but also like if you even just try to get a pulse check of sort of like a survey or something, like just try to be like very precisely focused on like, what is your experience and what can we do better? Because I think, people might be like, oh, we do survey, we just, ask what are your sort of your general satisfaction questions, but you may need to tailor it more towards like, the comfort, the respect, the autonomy, in sort of the realm of accessibility and getting precise feedback and ideas around being more accessible versus just a general like, hey, you got any feedback or comments for us? Like, I mean, I feel like this is like the best venue to do that, but like you're really being like, I want you to tell me how we could be more accessible in this space. Like, please tell me. I'm sure there's a lot of room for growth, like, and uh, kind of starting that dialogue and everything. But curious, yeah, if you have any sort of just kind of final thoughts that you want to share on this topic as we wrap up the episode.
Yeah, I think just remembering that in residence life, like we are the students' homes, and we all hear the horror stories about some professor who, unless you have, for example, my friend is colorblind and was taking an art class and got a failing grade because of the color blindness, and the professor said if you want to retake this, you have to go through disability services and like get approval with your color blindness. So remembering that not everybody is going to advocate or understand. And if we can do one thing that makes it easier when the student is at home in what should be their safe space, that's going to make a really big difference overall. And it'll have a ripple effect on the campus community.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just a major point of retention of that student. Like, if they don't feel comfortable in the space they live, like they're probably eyeing the door. So that's just kind of a powerful call to action, I think, to wrap up the episode. And we'll have ways to connect in on the resources and stuff that you had mentioned in the show notes. But just thank you so much for hanging out and sharing all that you did on this important topic. And yeah, just thank you so much for your time.
Yeah, thank you for having me.